You alright?
How's your Bugatti?
Broke?
Whoa, snap!
Here's the truth. What looks like a simple comparison between two car purchases is actually something much deeper. And once you strip away the thumbnails, the comments, and the surface level reactions, you're left with two completely different ways of thinking about risk, information, and decision-making under pressure. At first glance, the story feels straightforward. One man spends around £900,000 on a Bugatti Veyron that arrives in pieces with a destroyed gearbox, while another spends less on a complete running example that simply refuses to come out of park. One looks like a disaster, the other looks like a win, but that's only true if you judge decisions based purely on early results, and that's exactly where most people get this wrong. To understand what's really going on, you have to look at what each person actually bought, not what the cars look like today. The Bugatti Veyron itself is not just another supercar. It was never meant to be. It was built to answer a question no one had successfully answered before. Could a road-legal production car deliver 1,000 horsepower, 16 cylinders, quad turbos, and still be something you could drive to the shops? Only 450 were ever made, and today they sit in a category where engineering, rarity, and history collide. That means every example is valuable, but more importantly, every example carries a story that directly affects that value. Now, take the first purchase. Spending £900,000 on a car that is physically split and has a shattered gearbox sounds outrageous until you look at the nature of the problem. The damage is obvious, visible, and defined. A cracked gearbox housing is not a mystery. It's a failure with a known cause, a known process, and a known path to repair. It's expensive, yes, and complicated, absolutely, but it's not unpredictable. When you buy something like that, you're not guessing what's wrong, you're calculating what it will take to make it right. That's a critical distinction. The buyer in this case wasn't walking into the unknown, he was stepping onto a long but clearly marked road. And that matters because in high-value machines like this, known problems are often safer than hidden ones. If you can see the issue, you can plan for it. You can estimate cost, timeline, and outcome with some level of confidence. Even if the repair bill climbs, it climbs within a framework you understand. In this case, even a six-figure gearbox rebuild still leaves room before reaching the market value of a fully functional car. So what looks reckless from the outside is actually a structured, informed gamble made by someone who understands exactly what they're dealing with. Now contrast that with the second purchase. On paper, it sounds better in every way. A complete car, a running engine, and a lower price. It rolls into the workshop, and within hours, a simple fix, a fuse, gets the gearbox working again. That's the kind of moment that spreads instantly because it feels like beating the system. It feels like proof that everyone else overcomplicates things. But that moment, as impressive as it is, doesn't tell the full story. In fact, it barely scratches the surface. The real issue with that car isn't what was found. It's what wasn't known. There's no history, no documentation, no clear record of how the car was used, maintained, or repaired, and that absence of information is where the risk lives. Because when something goes wrong in a car like this, it rarely happens in isolation. The blown fuse that stopped the gearbox from working wasn't the root problem, it was a symptom. Someone before had already encountered the issue and made a decision, not to diagnose it properly, but to work around it by increasing the fuse rating again and again until it stopped blowing. That's not a fix, that's a delay. And delays in mechanical systems often come at a cost. Running higher current through a circuit than it was designed for creates heat, and not the kind that immediately destroys something in a dramatic way, but the kind that slowly degrades components over time. Plastic softens, housing connections weaken, and damage spreads quietly until it reaches a point where failure becomes inevitable. The fact that the car still functioned long enough to be sold is not proof that everything is fine. It's evidence that the problem hasn't fully revealed itself yet. So while one buyer dealt with a single, clearly defined issue, the other is dealing with a collection of unknowns that are only starting to surface. A misfire across multiple cylinders, secondary systems not behaving correctly, a cooling system that's been temporarily patched rather than properly maintained. These are not isolated faults, they're clues, and each one raises a bigger question about what else might be hiding beneath the surface. This is where the comparison becomes genuinely interesting, because it stops being about cars and starts being about decision-making. One person chose certainty of problem, and uncertainty of effort. The other chose uncertainty of problem and the possibility of an easier path. Neither is inherently right or wrong. They're just different approaches to the same situation. In risk terms, this is the difference between known liabilities and unknown liabilities. Known liabilities can be priced, planned, and managed. Unknown liabilities cannot. They can grow, evolve, and reveal themselves in ways you didn't anticipate. That doesn't mean the second approach is worse. It just means it carries a different kind of exposure. And sometimes, as we've already seen, that exposure pays off quickly. But early wins don't eliminate underlying risk. They just delay the moment you have to confront it. There's also another layer to this that most people overlook entirely. Yeah, and that's how these cars are perceived once the work is done. In the hypercar world, provenance matters more than almost anything else. A car with a clear, documented story, what went wrong, how it was fixed, who did the work, is easier to trust. And trust directly affects value. A car with gaps in its history, signs of questionable repairs, and unresolved questions carries a different kind of reputation. Even if it runs perfectly, those questions don't disappear. They stay with the car. That means the long, methodical rebuild of a known issue can actually result in a more valuable and more desirable car than a quicker, less predictable project. Not because the end product is mechanically superior, but because the story behind it is clearer. And at this level, buyers aren't just paying for performance, they're paying for confidence. But then again, not every decision is driven by resale value. If the goal isn't to sell the car, but to experience it, to drive it, to take it on a journey, then the calculation changes completely. A cheaper entry point with a running car might be exactly what someone wants, even if it comes with unanswered questions. Because in that context, the value isn't in the asset, it's in the experience. And that's why asking, who made the better decision, doesn't have a simple answer. It depends entirely on what you value. If you value control, predictability, and long-term clarity, the first approach makes sense. If you value opportunity, momentum, and the chance to uncover something unexpected, the second approach becomes more appealing. What's undeniable is that both decisions required something most people don't have the appetite for. Faced with either option, a broken hypercar for nearly £1 million, or a mysterious one with no history, most people would walk away. The risk is too high, the knowledge required too specialized, and the margin for error too small. But these two didn't walk away. They asked a different question. Not, is this too risky, but can this be solved? And that shift in thinking is what makes the entire story compelling, because it's not really about the cars at all. It's about how people respond when faced with uncertainty at a high level. One chose to eliminate as much uncertainty as possible before starting. The other chose to confront uncertainty head-on and figure it out along the way. Both paths lead forward. Both come with costs. And both, in their own way, work. The only difference